Good evening and welcome to SVA MFA Fine Arts ongoing talk series. It's my pleasure this evening to introduce Jamie Isenstein. Jamie blurs the distinction between performance and sculpture, often using her own body as a ready-made material in her inhabited sculptures, where she absorbs the persona of objects. In 2013, Jamie was the champion of the Creative Times Sandcastle competition. Also, her work has she's been featured in solo shows at Andrew Krepp's gallery here in New York, at Meyer Riegger Gallery in, was it Berlin or Karlsruhe? Berlin?
No, Karlsruhe, and then Berlin's coming up in October.
Okay, in Karlsruhe, Germany, and Berlin coming up in October. Michael Benevento Gallery in Los Angeles, and Guild and Grayskull? Grayskull. Guild and Grayskull in New York. She's been included in museum and group exhibitions at Atlanta Contemporary Art Center, Palais de Tokyo in Paris, Tate Liverpool, PS1, Art Basel Miami, Performa 05 here in New York, the CCA Wadis in San Francisco, and MUMAC in Vienna, among many others. Her work's been featured in the New York Times, Art in America, Modern Painters, Art Forum, Hyperallergic, Interview, and Vogue Italia, to name just a few. She's represented here in New York by Andrew Krepp's. She received an MFA from some school up on Morningside Heights in 2004, and a BA from Reed College in Portland in '98. Please join me in welcoming Jamie Isenstein. Oh, and I also want to mention that I insisted that Jamie not read, and she was planning on reading. So please give her a major pass, because I really twisted her arm to wing it. So.
Should I do a survey? Do you prefer not listening to somebody ad-lib or read? Ad-lib. Even if they spent hours coming up with points? All right, well then there goes that slide. Is it? Well, actually the reason why I put that slide there is not because that's my work, but that's a scene from the Addams Family. If you just to warn you of the thing, because what is the thing? If not something nebulous that we don't know what it is. And so with my own artwork, I am often trying to blur the line between what is performance and what is sculpture and what is an object, try to figure out what defines an object. I consider myself coming from a Duchampian perspective in which anything can be art, and so I'm also thinking about that in object. What can be an object? Can it be animate and live? I mean, does it have to be inanimate and living, or not moving, or can it be? There are weird examples of, say, a human heart on a dissecting table. Is that an object, or is that a person? So I'd like to try and figure out what is this in between? What is an object? And let's see, what else can I tell you? So this is the first artwork that I will start with today, and it's actually the oldest that I'm going to talk about, but everything is out of order. And this is Magic Fingers. What I'm doing here is I'm standing behind a wall with my hand in a frame, and when you walked into the room, you couldn't see me, so it was just like a painting. I considered it like a tableau vivant, and well, I don't. I'm so disorganized when I'm not reading. So I call these you might think of this as performance art by me being in the artwork, but actually I consider it performative sculpture. I say I'm inhabiting the sculpture, in this case a painting, because the idea is that if I'm coming from a Duchamp perspective of what can art be, if you include a human body in the art, then is it performance, or can it still be sculpture or painting? And in this case, I consider it a painting. And I realize there are contradictions in this, but that I like to emphasize the physical property of the artwork rather than the theatrical aspect. So I first did the work for 6 months, or for 3 weeks at an art gallery, and then I was invited to do it again at PS1 for Greater New York 2005, which was 6 months long. So I had to go to the gallery every day and sit behind the wall with my hand in the frame. And so you imagine here, if I'm behind the wall and I'm just have my hand, and I'm posing my hand in art historical gestures, and I actually had a monograph of, or not a monograph, art survey of different art works from history that I was going through and looking at hand gestures and then doing that with my hand. And so if you're imagining somebody's going there and they're in the artwork for 6 hours a day for 6 months, what happens when they have to go on break or eat lunch? So the solution I had for that is I would hang a will return sign in the frame. And what I like about this artwork, about using the will return sign, is that it solves all sorts of problems for me. It's all, of course, what can happen when I want to take a break, but also it suggests that I'll come back. And so then the artwork can last in an exhibition space with something interesting happening. It's not like a theater where the curtain closes and that's it. And so in this way, it can make the artwork last forever. And, but then also, of course, you think, okay, so she'll come back. If this artwork, with the will return sign, I can sell the artwork, so it could go live in somebody's house, and then I'll go and be in the artwork in their house. And you think, okay, so she can do that for a while, but one day she's not going to be able to do that because she's going to die. So what's the solution? And then that's where the will return sign goes from being a useful device to actually talking about mortality. And it becomes a kind of conceit in which you start out thinking about things going on forever, and then they flip and talk about endings. Well, because I think of it as tied to my lifespan, and because if it was somebody else's lifespan, then you wouldn't be able to talk about the mortality aspect of it, or to think about how artwork isn't forever. Nothing's forever. There are artworks that I've made that I'll show you that don't require me. They can require a performer, but in this case, and with most of the work I'll show you, it does have to be me. Also, it's really difficult to convince somebody to go do this artwork. I mean, you could pay them, but sometimes they're physically demanding in a way that I don't think I could even pay anyone to do. I'm asked this question all the time, and it is important to me. It's not like a balancing performance where you make this thing and then other people can perform it over, different companies can perform it. It's like specifically me. Even though I'm saying this is my hand is an object in this artwork. So I actually have a video of this work. I don't normally take video, but so you can see I just held my hand really still, and people would walk by and they would see it, and oftentimes they would just see it and walk by and think it's just a hand in a frame. And also in the video, there's more shadow. In real life, it was much more flat. It didn't have that dark top. And
sitting or standing?
I was actually sitting. So I'd move my hand. Sometimes if somebody was seeing it, they would scream. I had a lot of reactions. Yeah, I supported my arm so that, because I had to do it for so long, and actually got a lot of other work done behind the wall. Like my taxes. I sewed things with the needle in my mouth, or like, you know. No, it was like a, kind of like a relief, I guess, or people did touch my hand. Some people, I did have people give me paper cuts as like in argument, like there was an argument over whether I was wax, and then somebody gave me a paper cut. Yeah, it's creepy. Yeah, so I started actually marking on the wall how many times I heard a scream or how many times I heard different questions about like, was it real or was it mechanical or was it wax. So I start with this work, or after that I'm going to move on to this work because disembodied body parts are interesting to me, and also the body in commerce. And this is a necklace display, like the kind you would see in a jewelry store window. And when I'm interested in this overlap between the body and commerce in a way, and it begins with my interest in Walter Benjamin. I can say Walter Benjamin. People always say Benjamin, but they say Walter, but it should be Walter Benjamin, right? Like, so, I mean, I don't know, I'll just say Walter Benjamin. So there's this book written by Susan Buck Morris called The Dialectics of Seeing, and in the book she is giving context to Walter Benjamin's arcade projects, in which she talks about how when he was going through the arcades and writing about them, it was a time when the arcades were no longer in fashion. The arcades of Paris were like their 19th century shopping center. And, but their stores were out of date, and when Benjamin was walking through, he would see displays for women with long hair at a time when women had bobs, and there was corset advertisements when women stopped wearing corsets. And for Benjamin, this idea that, that actually fashion could be a marker for time, and that when you look at fashion and there's the idea of the just past, which is that when you look at an artwork, at a fashion and say it's just recently out of date and you recoil in horror, you're not recoiling in horror because it's so ugly now, because it's so out of fashion, but because it reminds you of the passage of time and it reminds you of your own mortality. So fashion in a way becomes a kind of tied to mortality. And so, yeah, the commodified body in a way becomes also the ephemeral body. And this is actually what you can get a closer look. The necklace display had a locket on it, and the locket actually had no face in it, so it was headless in many ways. I also think of the work as a kind of a Russian doll of pedestals, where you have like one pedestal or of display on another pedestal of display on another. So the locket on top of the necklace display on top of a pedestal. So speaking of commerce and the will return sign, this is the Wrong Gallery, which is a small space that existed on 20th Street in around 2005, and they invited me to do this space. To put something in this space and the one down the street. There are two Wrong Gallery spaces, but it was only about like 11 inches deep. And they said, "Why don't you do a performance in there?" But there's no way I could fit anything in there, so I put a will return sign in. But I actually automated it so that the will return sign is actually running 10 minutes ahead, but there's no second hand, so you don't see it moving, and so it's moving very slowly. People would come to the gallery, they would say, "Oh, come back in 5:05," and then they would come back at 5:05 and it would say 5:15. So it would be this perpetual postponement. Let's see. So anything. And then this is the other side of the wrong gallery. In fact, what's happening here is that the lettering is backwards because, and they did that on the door so that, to suggest that when you're looking through the door, it's you're inside looking through outside. So there's this reversal of inside and outside, and I decided to play with that. And I knew that I was going to be installing the work from January till March, so there was going to be a change of seasons. So what I did was I filled the space with ice till it was my height, and that actually turned out to be about 900 pounds. And actually ended up having to kind of cast it because otherwise it was going to be thousands of pounds. But it was about 4 degrees out the day I installed it, so I could do that. And then I put a top hat on top. And the idea was that slowly over time, the ice would melt and the top hat would do this sort of descending performance on the ground. And so this is what it looked like at the beginning of March. And then by the very end, the hat was on the ground altogether. Let's see.
Where did the water go?
So it just evaporated. I actually had expected there to be a puddle in front of the gallery, but there never was. And I was hoping for a puddle because I thought passersby would walk through the puddle and you would see footprints. And then it would be this kind of disappearing act where it was like me disappearing and walking away, but actually that didn't happen. That's okay. And then I actually installed this artwork at Bard at one point. I was invited to be in somebody's curatorial program final show, and we installed it inside. And then we didn't realize how fast it would melt because we thought that much ice, and ice as tall as me, would last for a long time, but actually it melted really fast and started raining water through the concrete floor where they have their art collection below. So all the installation shots of that version of the artwork have the maintenance guy with a mop. All right, so this is a 100-year calendar. Me drawing also from the world of commerce, in this case, basing this calendar on the aesthetics of an office supply store calendar. And basically what it is just 100 years, and it's, when I started making the work, it was around 2000, it took me months to screen print each page, but it was around the end of 2008, and it just happened that when I ended the calendar, it was October of 2008, which was the month that, if you remember, was when the global financial recession happened, when stock markets around the world were crashing. And so when I look at this work now, even though the date is meant to be arbitrary and coincidental, I actually think of this work as kind of a looking towards the future, and maybe perhaps a good future or a worse future, depending. But so this is 100 years of just the pages lined up. And the idea was that you could just keep tearing the page off as you go, and slowly the calendar would get smaller and smaller. This is armchair, and when I was thinking about this work, I was thinking about how we use objects as metaphors for the body, and how we use the body as metaphors for objects, or when you say she's a brick house, or in the case of this chair, there's when you say this is the arm of a chair and this is the leg of a chair. So I decided that I was going to demetaphorize the chair and turn the metaphors into the real thing, and that. So basically, what happens is when I'm not there, then it's like I'm the skeleton of the chair, and the chair collapses forward. And then, of course, I put a will return sign to explain when I'll be back. And so this is the painting by Magritte, The Treason of Images. It says, this is not a pipe, ceci n'est pas une pipe. The idea of this painting being that this is a representation of a pipe. It's not actually a pipe. If somebody said, what is that? You would say a pipe, but it's actually a painting of a pipe. So in thinking about that and what is representation versus what is the real thing, I decided to create an installation using the chair and based on this painting. And there's me sitting in the chair, and in the room when you walked in was a table with a pipe sitting on it, and the pipe, the dimensions of the tabletop are the same as the dimensions of the painting. And there's a pipe sitting on the table, and the pipe is constantly smoking. And you think, it's constantly smoking. This is not an ordinary pipe, and this is not a pipe. And then, in a way, in the end, the artwork references its own illusion by talking about it being a not ordinary pipe. See, also in the background were some photographs. I sometimes use a skeleton in my work, and in this case, the idea being that based on Renaissance companion portraits, where you would have profile paintings of the master of the house. So I have me and the skeleton sort of in a position in a staring contest to suggest who is the master of the house. And to bring in the idea of the mortality of the idea that this chair is made up of a half-living thing and is like it has a skeleton on the inside. There's another work that's similar to the chair. It's also used based on this idea of how we use language with the arm of the lamp being replaced by the real arm. And in this case, the light bulb, you can't see it in this photograph, but the light bulb is self-lit, and it's like if you've seen the Addams Family, where like the intro where Uncle Fester has a light bulb in his mouth. I'm just using one of those magic light bulbs. So there's no cables, and then I would just hold my hand, and yeah. And then of course when I'm not there, there's a will return sign and a little velvet curtain. And this work, I decided to question what is real and what is representation, to further think about what I was thinking about with the work based on the Magritte painting. And the idea is that if you think about abstraction, and that abstraction is not representational, it is what it is, you can make the same case, for the ready-made, that it is not representational, it is what it is. Like when Marcel Duchamp put a urinal on its side, it's not like he was representing a urinal, he was using, it is what it is, it was a urinal. So for this work, I decided to combine my body and use my body as a ready-made and turn it into an abstract sculpture, so that I'm combining this idea of it is what it is. So it's an abstract sculpture, and it's also kind of a joke on this trend in abstract sculpture to like Rachel Harrison, or where you include found objects with abstract shapes. In this case, there's an arm and my leg with a fishnet tights and a tap shoe, and then this is a life preserver. And the whole thing, and in the back of the sculpture is this can, and the can is one of those jokes where you take the lid off and then a snake jumps out, or like a worm jumps out, and this idea being that there's a woman inside the sculpture, and there's like this potential for it to escape, like the can, but it's being contained, and with the life preserver, it says "Wishing I was fishing." So it's like this sculpture is talking about being stuck on a pedestal and like it can't move, it can't. And I was thinking about those dancing cigarette ads from the 1950s. Of these, like, dancing objects with legs, but in this case, the sculpture is stuck on the pedestal and just waiting. And then this is what it looks like when I'm not there, and actually the life preserver changes to say "gone fishing." I think a little bit of the work, it has this sort of clown costume treatment to the outside also, and I think of it like a little bit of a snowman rolling down a mountain of ideas and just picking up stuff on the way as it's going. And also I think of it a little bit like Vladimir and Estragon from Waiting for Godot, is a lot of my artworks that they're just sitting there waiting for me, and then it's just like all about waiting, and because like this work now is just waiting for me, and yeah, so this idea of the wishing I was fishing is, I don't know, it's a sculpture that's waiting, and then it has this moment where it gets to go and explore. So this work actually I'm going to be doing at the Whitney Museum March 5th and 6th, so please come visit me. It'll be in the theater on the 3rd floor. And it's like the part of the Westreich Wagner collection show, so that's why it's there. And most of the sculptures that I do, I would say that they're sculptures. In this case, I actually call this one a performance because I'm playing a character of a curtain rigger from a theater, rather than incorporating my body into a sculpture. And basically what happens here is there's this player piano, and it plays a ragtime arrangement of the Bee Gees' Stayin' Alive. And it was arranged by my husband, who's a composer. And then I am behind the curtains. I've created this kind of small vaudeville theater stage, and I'm behind the curtain. You can actually see my foot hiding. And the idea was that I was pulling the ropes and make the curtains do a choreographed dance. And let's see. So there was a confusion of what is automated and what is not, because the player piano is automated and the curtains look automated. Like, this is what they look like most of the time. They're like opening and closing, and you can't see it. And but actually, it's not. Let's see. So I like to use the iconography of the theater and vaudeville, so this is a video that was also in the installation, and so basically what was happening is, I'll show you the video, but it's me and a animatronic skeleton doing a synchronized dance, and I'm trying to hold myself in the same position as the skeleton. Like, you can see my face trying to smile the same way. And the work is based on the Renaissance or the Baroque genre, the Dance of Death, which, if you're not familiar with that, it was a genre that was popular in the 15th, 16th century, in which there would be imagery of a skeleton dancing with a person, and then the idea is that when the dance is over, then the person dies. And so I decided to do a video of a Dance of Death, but video would be on a constant loop, and when you play it, it's played constantly, so it never ends. So it's like a subversion of the Dance of Death. Also think of it a little bit like the John Henry myth of, if John Henry was a pile driver from it's like railroad folklore, where he's like challenging him. Like, it was around the time when he was like driving nails into rocks to lay the railroad, and then they came up with a steam-powered engine to do it. But then he he decided to have a kind of a contest with the steam-powered engine to prove that humans could work faster than the engine. And in fact, he actually did win, but he immediately had a heart attack and died. So anyway, but in this case, because the video doesn't end, it's kind of it's like John Henry, but it comes to a different conclusion where it doesn't end. So anyway, here's the video. So it just keeps going and going. When the installation is happening, when I'm dancing the curtains are that soundtrack is being played by the player piano, so that's what the curtains are dancing to as well. And you can imagine that song going and going and going for 10 hours at a time. In March, on the day that I'm doing it, the Whitney's open for 10 hours. And when I do these works where I'm incorporating myself, I'll go and I do it for the whole time that I can, because I can take breaks with a will return sign. So it's not like endurance performance. It's up to me when I want to stop and when I want to start again. So the idea of a never-ending performance could technically happen if there was an intermission that never ends. So I decided to make an intermission sign that could exist. It also sits on the line of is it in the middle of a performance, or is it a sculpture because it just sits there, or is it a painting because it's intermission, it's an acrylic painting on canvas. So as you can see with the intermission sign, I'm interested in this nebulous region between what is performance and what is sculpture, or between different disciplines. And in this case, this is from a series called Rug Woogies, in which I sat at the harp and our various stringed instruments and did a performance in which I wove the instruments into rugs rather than as a way of playing the instruments. So instead of creating sound, I'm like dampening the sound. And the idea being that it starts out as a performance and ends up as a sculpture. And this is what it looked like when I was weaving. Oh, well, this is a different one where I'm weaving. And then when I'm not there, I put an intermission sign on the work. This is a 2-channel video that's in an installation. This is called Ossifal Magical, and it's another installation in which I decided to use themes related to vaudeville and, in this case, magic, and also address time-based problems of time-based performance, and the relationship of the body to presence and absence. What happened here, the idea was that if I'm often using disembodied body parts, I'm using an arm or a leg, what happens if I'm using the whole body and I'm removing the head is that, what is this mind-body problem? How is the head? Is the head like the motor that's perched on top of this object that is the body that makes the object go? What does it mean for me to be in the artwork? And when you're in your own artwork, oftentimes within performance, people use you see people's faces, but what does it mean to make artwork in which I'm like deliberately hiding my face. Anyway, so in this video, so basically I just started, in thinking about that, I started to research headlessness and realizing that there's this grand tradition of headless bodies, like the tale of, or the legend of Sleepy Hollow with the headless horseman, and they fit in with like bodies that seem like they should be dead, but they live forever, like zombies and vampires. But one in particular that I found fascinating was there's this 20th century French philosopher Georges Bataille, which you're probably familiar with, and he had a magazine dedicated to the headless figure. The idea being that during his time, an ideal figure would be a person without a head, because it would be it would be like a metaphor for the perfect society, in which a society doesn't have a leader, because he was living in a time when fascism was on the rise. And of course, with fascism, everybody's equal except you have a dictator. And so the idea being that the leader of a society is the head. So if you remove the head, then you can have the society that can keep moving without it. And so anyway, I decided to make this video based on the magician and the idea of the magician as this kind of screen for our desire and what we're, things, when you look at magic, you think things happen, like everything works out in magic. And well, anyway, this is a video of a headless magician playing a musical saw, and I had it accompanied to another video of a fan playing bottles of water, and I'll just play it a bit. So the idea of the head, if you have the headless magician, and then you have this kind of head surrogate with the fan blowing air over bottles of water. I don't think I'll play the whole thing, but we can listen to it for a little while. So the thing about the musical saw is that it sounds like a woman singing, so it's another head replacement. And the musical saws, if you're not familiar with it, was a popular vaudeville entertainment. So she's playing the saw by bowing the saw and then moving the saw to make the curve of the saw is and the vibration of the saw is what causes it to make a sound. Right.
Did you change the frame rate on the image on the left or something?
It's weird. I don't know what's going on.
Animated.
Yeah, well, for one thing, I filmed this on pre-HD camera, and so you're seeing interlacing, which maybe you're all young enough that you might not be that familiar with interlacing problem. But anyway, so you see a lot of interlacing because this is an HD projector. I'm always going to have a problem with this, is you can't keep up with technology. We'll all be filming in HD now, and then they're going to come up with something even crazy, like even more high definition, and then HD video is going to look terrible. Anyway, this is the saw the lady, the grand illusion of where the idea is that you saw the lady in half. I'm using the idea. It's like the musical saw that the magician is using is also a saw that's used to saw the lady in half. But in this case, I'm using it to saw the head off, and off the figure. And instead of it being a magician's assistant, I just sawing the head off the magician, if I'm considering the magician as a stand-in for the artist. And then, of course, when the body leaves, the head stays. So you can imagine a headless figure walking around on the streets. This is what the installation shot looked like. And you can see over here there was another work. This is Clap Magic. And that's another instance of a head surrogate. And here a lamp is plugged into a clapper. And then there's videos of hands clapping, and when the hands clap, it turns the lamp on. So this is the lamp off, and this is the lamp on. And if you're not familiar, this is a clapper. If you grew up in America, you're familiar with the TV commercials. It's a sound trigger that turns a lamp on and off based on some very specific clapping rhythm. And the lamp is my height, so the idea is that the hands are clapping, and then it's like a performer responding to applause. Let's see. And here is a question I like to think about is, I'm standing very still as, wait, isn't that Donald Trump? I forgot. That ruins it. So here I'm standing very still at Madame Tussauds Wax Museum in Times Square. And the idea being that, am I doing a performance or am I being an object by standing there with the wax figures? If context is everything, according to Duchamp, then can I use my whole body as a ready-made and stand really still? So I did that, and I would just, but actually I had a really hard time staying still when people looked at me. So I took the photograph, stood still for a while, and then I laughed. And actually a side note, which is that Performa Biennial asked me to do this work, and I thought I would do it, but I don't know how to advertise it because we can't tell everybody, go watch Jamie stand really still, because the point is that you don't know that I'm there. And a lot of people who go to the museum don't know who all the celebrities are, so they didn't necessarily know that I wasn't a celebrity. So it was actually convincing for a second. I had like Vaseline all over my face, so it was shiny. Anyway. I contacted the museum to ask them if I could do it again because I got permission to do this and have the photograph taken the first time. And it was only about a few months after I did this, and they weren't responding. I kept calling and emailing, and I got no response, and I had to tell Performa that I wasn't going to do it. And then a few months after that, I got an email from a friend of something. It was like TMZ or something, that Ozzy Osbourne they had taken the Ozzy Osbourne wax figure out of the museum, and he was sitting there really still and scaring people. So I think what happened is I did this, and then soon after Ozzy Osbourne's people did it, and then they couldn't have me do it again as an actual event because they had just done that and they were ignoring me. I think that's what happened. Anyway, but I think it's better that Ozzy Osbourne did it because he really was in the museum, as you know. So this is inside outside backstage vase. So deception is an important part of my work, this appears to be a simple vase with flowers, but actually some of the flowers are hyper-realistic silk flowers and some of them are real flowers. And the idea is that over time the real flowers will wilt and die and reveal themselves. And then the artwork would sit on display for about 2 weeks or more, and then the wilted flowers would be removed and new ones would be put in place. Also, more deception. This is Rug, 5 rugs. It's an artwork based on Aesop's fable of the wolf in sheep clothing. In this case, the wolf is in the sheep clothing, the sheep is in the bear clothing, I'm in the wolf clothing, and we're all lying on a carpet. And we're stacked like we would be at a rug, like stack of rugs at a rug store. And the thing about this rug, this work, is that it actually encompasses the entire history of civilization, from caveman furniture to apartment furniture. So the suggestion is that the history of civilization is a history of artifice and deception. And then, of course, when I'm not there, there's a will return sign suggesting also that you can't remove the human presence. And this work is a magician's jacket, and also another work about deception. In this case, a magician. The jacket has all these secret pockets in it, and within each secret pocket is a like a coin or a rope, or there's a bouquet of flowers in there. So you look at the jacket, you can't see anything. It looks lumpy, but in fact, actually, it's like pregnant with possibilities for magic, things to happen that you never get to see because it's just there's no magician wearing it. And another artwork based on deception. This is Book of the Dead. They're gallery sign-in books. And what I would do is I would cover the gallery sign-in books with, so you go into an art gallery and you see the book that people would sign their names in. With gallery's permission, I would replace their book with my book, and my book would say Book of the Dead. So then when people would go to see the artwork and then they sign their name afterwards, they're signing the Book of the Dead. And they don't know, nobody's like closing the book to look, so I'm tricking them. And then what's great is that I'm just getting these amazing signatures, and you look through them and you see all these artists' names, and of course everyone in them is going to die. And then I gathered all the books. It took 5 years to collect them, or to create them, sending them out to different galleries, and I got the books back. Some of them I didn't get back, so they're still there. I don't know. Sometimes it would take more than a year for a gallery to even go through a whole book. Then I put them in a show and had for sale, and they like a library. And then what happens is then somebody bought it, and there's this kind of Faustian contract that happens where somebody bought all these souls. This is Empire Fire, and in this case, another show exhibition about deception, and also my interest in mortality and immortality, and also ephemerality of the body, as well as the permanence of objects. And in this case, what you see here is I took the set directions for the play No Exit by Jean-Paul Sartre. You probably read it in French class. And that's a play that takes place in hell. And so all the actors in the play are dead. And the set directions start the play. It's something like a small room, 19th century, Second Empire furniture, bronze sculpture on the mantelpiece. So what I did was I took I gathered together those elements, and I put them in a kind of, I think of it as kind of like a little pyre, sort of like a bonfire of the vanities. And I set everything on fire by turning them all into oil lamps, so you can see that they all have fire coming out of them. And here, this is actually a Savonarola chair, which is the chair named after the Dominican, I think, friar, he's a priest, Dominican priest, who instigated the bonfire of the vanities in the 1400s, in which, so I'm not going to give you a history lesson. But anyway, so when visitors would walk into the room, they would see all these things on fire. And the idea is, okay, so everything's on fire, we should put it out. Where is the fire extinguisher? And here in the corner is a hose. But the problem is that, obviously, clearly the hose isn't dispensing water, but dispensing a hand. So that there's this kind of surrealist joke that happens where what you want to be on fire is, or what you would want to use, the thing you would want to use to put out the fire is actually could disintegrate itself. So, and then, of course, this photograph was also in the exhibition. The idea being that if oil lamps are like, they're the eternal flame. They are like candles, but they don't, they're not consumed by the fire. So candle is like the body in that it is consumed. And then in this case, the candle's like, no, no, don't put me out. Then, of course, everything in the, both in the end, the hand and the candle will be consumed. So. And then this is work from my most recent New York show, which was this past April. And in this show, the show is called, I titled it Paradrama, based on this term that I was reading about in researching the paranormal community, because I was watching all these TV shows about, like, ghost hunter TV shows, if you've seen that on, like, Sci-Fi Channel. And what was happening in those community is that there would be these teams that would set up to go find ghosts, and then they were starting to compete with each other to find the most, like, the scariest ghosts, or like who could be the most legitimate or the most riskiest in order to attract the attention of TV producers. And because everybody wanted their own TV show. And so maybe you noticed a few years ago, there was, like, all of a sudden a lot of ghost hunter TV shows. And so within that community, they started calling it paradrama, like, no more paradrama with the paranormals. And I found it so funny because so much effort and like, you know, everybody's, like, accusing each other of making claptrap equipment, and like, my equipment's more legitimate than your equipment. But the thing is that no one's ever empirically proven that there are ghosts. So, you know, who can say who's right? And then at the same time, we still believe, and you don't want, because you don't want to die. So so you want ghosts to really exist. So in this exhibition, I decided to use my body, but in a different way than in the past, where here I'm actually hidden. And in this case, this is a mechanical bed, and the bed is actually making and unmaking itself, like a ghost is pulling it down and pulling it up. And I'm inside the mattress, pulling the covers with magnets. Unlike my other work, this work I don't call it a sculpture, I call it a performance. Anyone can do it. And the idea is then that this work can go on indefinitely. Unlike my other work, which ends up being in this other phase, where, you know, where, like, the inhabited phase and the uninhabited phase. Once I'm dead, then the uninhabited phase exists permanently. In this case, this can keep going on and on, like we were first discussing. Because ghosts don't die, they're already dead. Let's see. The title of the bed is called The Mechanical Bed, and the title of the bed is based on the mechanical Turk, which maybe you're familiar with, which was an automaton from the 18th century that was a Turkish figure that would play chess. And it was toured through Europe, and Kings played it, and I think like maybe Ben Franklin played it when it came to America, and Napoleon played it. And so it was like, it was considered the first idea of artificial intelligence like that. But it turned out that it was later revealed, like 200 years later, it was revealed that actually there was like a midget chess master, like a really small chess master inside the box. So it's kind of like me being inside the bed. Let's see. Another work in the show was similar to my pipe work from the past, and work that talks about its own illusion of, this is a fan that's has gloves attached to the front, so when it's on the gloves look like they're hypnotizing. And then on the back of the chair is a wind chime, so the fan is causing the wind chimes to create a kind of eerie sound. And the idea is that somebody sitting in the chair doesn't know that that they're being hypnotized, and that they don't know where the sound is coming from. And also in the show was a bunch of oil lamps, and in this case, this is a table with a plate and a glass of water on it, and this is actually a detail. And it was stark like a theater set, and the idea being that, so you have this plate with water on it, and then there's a cup of water that's filled up at the beginning of the exhibition, and then through the month, the water slowly evaporates, but it looks like it's being drunk by an invisible presence. And then also there was this series of pillows that had masks on them, and this mask has fire in its mouth, and the mask is sitting on a pillow, so that it's kind of like there's a strange juxtaposition of the pillow's going to catch on fire, and then the mouth has fire coming out of it. But then it's also kind of like, so it's like activating the mask, but it's also like the mask is a death mask. And then there's the other one. And so there's a whole mask theme in this show. These are mascot heads wearing masks. In this case, this is Charlie Brown wearing an alien mask, wearing a Peking opera mask, wearing a pantomime mask, wearing a clown nose, and then this one is Super Mario Luigi wearing a Frankenstein mask, wearing a tiger mask, wearing a pantomime mask, wearing a mouse mask. And I called the works Onions based on the Ibsen play Peer Gynt, in which Peer is sitting in an onion field, and he's talking about his life and all the roles he's played, and he's like peeling the onion, and he slowly, he's like, here, this is the, I can't remember, but like, this is when I was unfaithful to my wife, or this is when I was the Undertaker, or whatever. I can't remember the exact examples, but so he's sitting there peeling this onion and talking about the roles he's played in his life, and then at the end it's empty and it's hollow, just like these guys. And then also there was this on the wall, it was ghost clothes. This is like a ghost costume, but and the thing about the ghost costume is that it was originally like a 19th century theater convention, that it was supposed to represent the shroud, and then people would come on stage wearing it, and then you would be like, okay, that person's dead, but then eventually it turned into our hokey Halloween ghost. And so what's interesting for me about it is that the costume is this thing that's supposed to make something absent present, but it's also disguising, so it makes something present absent. In this case, it's like a white sheet, and it's hung on a white wall so that it camouflages and disappears. And then also in the work, and the show is more fan works. I like to use fans because they create this sort of this like phenomena of they move things without touching them, but also they're like the breath of life. And in this case, and so that you can kind of create these automatons through them. In this case, these are two books that are lying on a pedestal and with two fans, one fan on each side, and the fans are oscillating so that they're making the pages of the book turn. And on the pages of the book are eyes, paintings of eyes, so that as the pages turn, it's like they're blinking. And so if you stand in the right spot at the right moment, they'll like both open and look at you, and it's actually really creepy. Then there's more wearing mask photographs, and then there's, yeah. So anthropomorphizing of objects is interesting to me. In this case, putting a mask on a mask suggests that the original mask is like, wants to be disguised. All right, so uncanny is interesting to me as a theme that I explore, and in this case, this is, if you're familiar with uncanny, or the uncanny, it's that weird feeling you get when something seems familiar, but it's not, or like something that is familiar is out of place, like the example of hair on your head is fine, but hair in your soup is creepy. So my interest in the disembodied body often plays on the uncanny, and in this case, this is a doorknob on the wall, and then the doorknob has a key, like a skeleton keyhole, and there's no door. It's just the doorknob directly on the wall. And you would think when you look through the keyhole, it's like you would see some sort of Alice in Wonderland other world, but actually what you see is your own eye. So there's a mirror behind the plate, and it's disorienting because you see your eye, but you don't recognize it as your own eye. And in fact, a lot of people think that somebody else is behind the wall looking back at them. And then this is another book of teeth. So the idea is you read the book, the teeth. It's like the book is eating. This is a good place to stop. I'll stop with this one. So this is an inside-out suitcase. The idea is that if you have a suitcase and you have the outside world interfacing with the outside of the suitcase, if you turn the suitcase inside out, then that puts everybody in the outside world into the suitcase, so that is now the outside world. And actually, we're now all in the suitcase. And then this is me getting into the suitcase, which is actually me getting out of the suitcase. And then this is not a performance, I'm just demonstrating a device on how to escape. So there I am outside of the suitcase, and it's like a void, like a way to end. So that's a good way to end. Gone. All right. Questions, anyone?
I really want to ask you about your childhood, but that's really what I want to ask. But that's a big question. The Addams family. I mean, there's kind of something kind of creepy in all of this, obviously, but it's very interesting in that way. But like the Addams family, how do they come into this? That was the first image you showed.
Why? Well, because if I had read my lecture, I would have gone into thing theory and talking about the thing and objects, and it began the lecture with beware of the thing because of that. But the Addams family is, hokey pop culture is like infused in my work. Oh, in the thing? Oh, you don't know? Okay, so in the Addams family, 1950s, the thing is their pet hand. It's 1950s family. I highly recommend, if you haven't ever seen an Addams Family episode, watch it. It's a family of misfits in which they're obsessed with death, and they have a pet hand that is like, and it's actually Lurch's hand. If you know the character Lurch, the actor who plays Lurch also plays the thing. But anyway.
I was just curious, did you sign the Book of the Dead whenever you
I've
sold them?
never signed the Book of the Dead.
You never signed
them?
No. So in some way, do you feel that it's not necessarily yours. Once the person buys it, it's theirs.
The books?
Yeah.
Yeah, they own it now.
Okay, cool.
There's still some floating around.
How
If
many
I
did you
receive
make?
them, what's that?
How many did you make?
I think I got 11 back, but I think I made 20 in total. So, but some of them just were like, I sent it to a gallery in Denmark that's like, it's been 7 years now or something, and they're still waiting for people to sign it. Yeah. But they don't know it's the Book of the Dead. It's just sitting there. It's just that people don't go to that gallery very often. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how you go on breaks? Like, how do you climb out from underneath all the rugs during the middle of the gallery? And then, like, how do you deal with then having to crawl back in and, like, having people walk around and see that part of the experience?
Well, that's actually a good question, because I don't like people to see it, because it ruins it if people can see the illusion and broken down. And so I always make sure that when they're installed, it's in a situation where I can close a door, or, you know, in some cases, like the hand in the oval frame, I just pull my hand down and then somebody else go and put a will return sign up. In case of the chair, that requires like there nobody being in the gallery, which means that sometimes I'd have to sit in that chair for like 6 hours. If we, you know, like waiting for a moment.
Or you're just waiting for like someone to leave the gallery or something.
Yeah, one of the precedences for this work that I like to think, like my inspiration, is a series of sculptures made by Charles Ray. It's very hard to find pictures of them. There are a few, but in which he's incorporated his bodies into steel shapes. And I actually got a chance to ask him once, like, how did you deal with getting in and out of it? And he's like naked. It's like there's one where there's like two rectangular cubes or rectangular shapes, and he has his arm out of one and a leg out of the other. And he said that he didn't want anyone to see it, so he had to design a gallery to show them, in which he would like herd the viewer out of the space so he could get out. Then he would go around and get into another sculpture. Then they would bring the audience in. They would watch it, and then and then he said he never showed them again, because that was a ridiculous way to have, you know, to orchestrate. As far, I mean, I don't know if he's ridiculous, but that's the impression I got in talking to him. So I mean, it's tricky. I always have to think about how it's installed.
So I've heard this term thing theory, but I haven't read any. Could you quickly school, and I assume I'm not the only one.
I don't want to do that.
Can you school us on thing theory?
No.
No? Didn't you have it in your paper?
Well, in terms of my work, I'm just thinking, just thing theory is, I wouldn't call myself an expert at all, but I like to read about this theory of things, and about like how was our relationship to things, and how do things, it's like a
Can you drop a name? Like who's the go-to?
I think Bill Brown.
Bill Brown. Okay.
I think is I think he wrote the first thing that people would say, as he had a collection of essays about objects that people are like, this is, I think. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not the expert. I don't want to talk about it. But just think about it in terms of objects. Just think about, it's just like a theory of objects, because we've, a theory of, a theory of objects. And what is an object, and what are the definitions of an object, and how our objects are changing. Our idea of what objects are changing in this period that, 50 years ago were different. Yeah.
Can you say a word or two about, I want you to a little bit dismantle you're after magic and in many different ways, but can you dismantle the contract that has to be signed, or the type of dialogue you're having with the gallery to form, or
to do my
to be
inhabited
commissioned
work?
to be commissioned to do something that is so like time consuming and involve a lot of sacrifice on
Yeah.
your end. I don't know.
Well, I
if
make sure not to, I don't like to have a contract because I like to be able to come and go with my will return sign as I please, and I don't want to be like I have to do something, because what happens if, I don't know, I break a leg in the middle of the show and then I can't have to break a contract because it's my own body. I mean, I guess you would have stipulation for something like that, but I don't like to have contracts. One of the things about these works is that I find interesting is that I sell them and that people buy them, and then I go and do the thing at their house. So I have a relationship with the collector, like I'll go and be at the chair at that person's house, but we don't have a contract to say when I have to do it, or like I have to do it on every Christmas party or whatever. So yeah, I try to keep it loose so that I have more freedom.
Can you say more about like what it looks like to go to someone's house and do that?
Yeah, I mean,
Just give us a specific example.
well, like,
do they
I
get to
mean,
keep you for 6 hours for like? Do they get to keep some of your some of the props?
There's too many questions. Wait. What? Sorry. Yeah, it's fine. It's. I mean, I just put in they put the chair where they want it because it's their artwork, and then I go and get in it, and and then I'll, when I'm ready to get I'll wait till there's a good moment to leave.
So would they maybe email you to invite you to come by and do it?
Yeah. So so everybody who owns my work that that I lend my body to, I develop a personal contact with them, so that, but often they can go through the gallery, or they can talk to me. I'm accessible.
I'm curious about fabrication, and it seems like sometimes you use ready-made objects, like maybe that suitcase stand might be ready-made, but it seems like you had to fabricate the suitcase.
Right.
Maybe like that lamp that was your height was I mean.
No, I made the lamp, but
Yeah. So
yeah.
I mean, do you like to make things yourself, or
Yeah, I
do you
do. Although I recently realized that for some of my ideas, I need to have more skilled people make them. But yeah, generally I make everything myself, because it's also so much about my own body, and like making the chair to fit my body, or making sure I can fit into the suitcase. I make it as I test it as I'm making it, and also I like to make stuff.
Last question.
Maybe I guess in between those parts where it seems like you're really having a good time and just making, I don't know, part of it is the humor or the absurd of it on these lines, and the other side, maybe it feels like you really buy into them, or you buy into the premise that there is some kind of ghost there, or into the mysticism of these objects and things. Where do you stand with that? Or how do you use
Well, I mean, I have a certain, because I use actually within a lot of my work techniques that magicians use. So it's like I'm coming at it from behind the curtain. I'm like, I'm hiding my body in that blob. Half of me is in the pedestal, So I'm coming from the knowledge side and not from the just pure looking at illusion and believing it, if that's what you mean.
But you didn't sign the book of the
Oh yeah, in that case, no, I'm superstitious. I wouldn't sign my own Book of the Dead if I knew I was. Although, I know the reality of the situation, which is that one day I'll die whether I sign the Book of the Dead or not. But, you do what you can to hold off. All right, well then there goes that slide. Is it? Well, actually, the reason why I put that slide there is not because that's my work, but that's a scene from the Addams Family. If you just to warn you of the thing, because what is the thing? If not something nebulous that we don't know what it is. And so with my own artwork, I am often trying to blur the line between what is performance and what is sculpture and what is an object, try to figure out what defines an object. I consider myself coming from a Duchampian perspective in which anything can be art, and so I'm also thinking about that in an object. What can be an object? Can it be animate and live? I mean, does it have to be inanimate and living, or not moving, or can it be? There are weird examples of, say, a human heart on a dissecting table. Is that an object, or is that a person? So I'd like to try and figure out what is this in between? What is an object? And let's see, what else can I tell you? So this is the first artwork that I will start with today, and it's actually the oldest that I'm going to talk about, but everything is out of order. And this is Magic Fingers. What I'm doing here is I'm standing behind a wall with my hand in a frame, and when you walked into the room, you couldn't see me, so it was just like a painting. I considered it like a tableau vivant, and well, I don't. I'm so disorganized when I'm not reading. So I call these what you might think of this as performance art by me being in the artwork, but actually I consider it performative sculpture. I say I'm inhabiting the sculpture, in this case a painting, because the idea is that if I'm coming from a Duchamp perspective of what can art be, if you include a human body in the art, then is it performance, or can it still be sculpture or painting? And in this case, I consider it a painting. And I realize there are contradictions in this, but that I like to emphasize the physical property of the artwork rather than the theatrical aspect. So I first did the work for 6 months, or for 3 weeks at an art gallery, and then I was invited to do it again at PS1 for Greater New York 2005, which was 6 months long. So I had to go to the gallery every day and sit behind the wall with my hand in the frame. And so you imagine here, if I'm behind the wall and I'm just have my hand, and I'm posing my hand in art historical gestures, and I actually had a monograph of, or not a monograph, art survey of different art works from history that I was going through and looking at hand gestures and then doing that with my hand. And so if you're imagining somebody's going there and they're in the artwork for 6 hours a day for 6 months, what happens when they have to go on break or eat lunch? So the solution I had for that is I would hang a will return sign in the frame. And what I like about this artwork, about using the will return sign, is that it solves all sorts of problems for me. Of course, what can happen when I want to take a break, but also it suggests that I'll come back. And so then the artwork can last in an exhibition space with something interesting happening. It's not like a theater where the curtain closes and that's it. And so in this way, it can make the artwork last forever. And, but then also, of course, you think, okay, so she'll come back. If this artwork, with the will return sign, I can sell the artwork, so it could go live in somebody's house, and then I'll go and be in the artwork in their house. And you think, Okay, so she can do that for a while, but one day she's not going to be able to do that because she's going to die. So what's the solution? And then that's where the will return sign goes from being a useful device to actually talking about mortality. And it becomes a kind of conceit in which you start out thinking about things going on forever, and then they flip and talk about endings. Well, because I think of it as tied to my lifespan, and because if it was somebody else's lifespan, then you wouldn't be able to talk about the mortality aspect of it, or to think about how artwork isn't forever. Nothing's forever. There are artworks that I've made that I'll show you that don't require me. They can require a performer, but in this case, and with most of the work I'll show you, it does have to be me. Also, it's really difficult to convince somebody to go do this artwork. I mean, you could pay them, but sometimes they're physically demanding in a way that I don't think I could even pay anyone to do. I'm asked this question all the time, and it is important to me. It's not like a balancing performance where you make this thing and then other people can perform it over, different companies can perform it. It's like specifically me. Even though I'm saying this is my hand is an object in this artwork. So I actually have a video of this work. I don't normally take video, but so you can see I just held my hand really still, and people would walk by and they would see it, and oftentimes they would just see it and walk by and think it's just a hand in a frame. And also in the video, there's more shadow. In real life, it was much more flat. It didn't have that dark top. And sitting or standing? I was actually sitting. So I'd move my hand. Sometimes if somebody was seeing it, they would scream. I had a lot of reactions. Yeah, I supported my arms because I had to do it for so long, and actually got a lot of other work done behind the wall. Like my taxes. I sewed things with the needle in my mouth. They're like, No, it was like kind of like a relief, I guess, or people did touch my hand. I did have people give me paper cuts as like in argument. Like there was an argument over whether I was wax, and then somebody gave me a paper cut. Yeah, it's creepy. Yeah, so I started actually marking on the wall how many times I heard a scream, or how many times I heard different questions about was it real, or was it mechanical, or was it wax. So I start with this work, or after that I'm going to move on to this work, because disembodied body parts are interesting to me, and also the body in commerce. And this is a necklace display, like the kind you would see in a jewelry store window. And when I'm interested in this overlap between the body and commerce in a way, and it begins with my interest in Walter Benjamin. I can say Walter Benjamin. People always say Benjamin, but they say Walter, but it should be Walter Benjamin, right? Like, so, I mean, I don't know, I'll just say Walter Benjamin.
Good evening and welcome to SVA MFA Fine Arts ongoing talk series. It's my pleasure this evening to introduce Jamie Isenstein. Jamie blurs the distinction between performance and sculpture, often using her own body as a ready-made material in her inhabited sculptures, where she absorbs the persona of objects. In 2013, Jamie was the champion of the Creative Times Sandcastle competition. Also, her work has she's been featured in solo shows at Andrew Krepp's Gallery here in New York, at Meyer Riegger Gallery in, was it Berlin or Karlsruhe? Berlin?
Karlsruhe, and then Berlin's coming up in October.
Okay, in Karlsruhe, Germany, and Berlin coming up in October. Michael Benevento Gallery in Los Angeles, and Guild and Grayskull? Grayskull. Guild and Grayskull in New York. She's been included in museum and group exhibitions at Atlanta Contemporary Art Center, Palais de Tokyo in Paris, Tate Liverpool, PS1, Art Basel Miami, Performa 05 here in New York, the CCA Wattis in San Francisco, and MUMOC in Vienna, among many others. Her work's been featured in the New York Times, Art in America, Modern Painters, Art Forum, Hyperallergic, Interview, and Vogue Italia, to name just a few. She's represented here in New York by Andrew Kreps. She received an MFA from some school up on Morningside Heights in 2004, and a BA from Reed College in Portland in '98. Please join me in welcoming Jamie Isenstein. Oh, and I also want to mention that I insisted that Jamie not read, and she was planning on reading. So please give her a major pass, because I really twisted her arm to wing it. So.
Wait, should I do a survey? Do you prefer not listening to somebody ad-lib or read? Ad-lib. Even if they spent hours coming up with points?